Is this a joke?
Is this a
Hargrove
joke?
stopped walking, not because he cared, because the sound irritated him the way a car alarm does. Something beneath his attention that had somehow gotten into it anyway. He looked at her the way you look at a stain on an expensive suit. A black girl, 14, sitting on concrete with a torn cap in front of her. My building, my block. I pay the city more in taxes than your whole street makes in a year. He leaned slightly forward. She looked up at him, calm, quiet. Yes, sir. I just need a few more minutes. My mama is sick. He straightened up, fixed his cufflink, turned away. Not my problem. And he walked through the door without looking back once. What Hargrove didn't know was that the girl he just silenced had a voice that was about to make him wish he had never opened his mouth. The Bronx, early morning. The kind of neighborhood where the buildings lean on each other like tired people on a subway car. Not because they want to, but because there's nowhere else to go. Apartment 4C. One room. A window that faced a brick wall. Zara Cole woke up before the sun most days, not because anyone told her to, but because the coughing started early. It always did. She would lie still in the dark, listening through the thin wall that separated her sleeping mat from her mother's bed, counting the seconds between each cough the way sailors count seconds between lightning and thunder, measuring the distance, bracing for what comes next. She was 14 years old, and she already knew how to be quiet in the specific way that only children of sick parents learn. Not silent, quiet. The kind that says, I'm here, but I won't cost you anything. Her mother's name was Diana Cole. There was a photograph on the nightstand beside Diana's bed. Small, slightly faded at the edges, tucked into a plastic frame that had cracked at one corner. In it, a young woman stood center stage in a floor-length gown, her arms open, her head tilted back, her mouth forming a note that seemed too big for any room to hold. The stage lights caught her face in a way that made her look lit from the inside. That woman looked nothing like the woman coughing behind the wall. And yet, they were the same person. Every morning before she left, Zara would stand at her mother's door. Diana would be propped up against two pillows, a glass of water on the nightstand beside the photograph, her breathing shallow but steady. Some mornings she was awake. Some mornings she pretended to be asleep so Zara wouldn't worry. They both knew. Neither of them said it. I'll be back by noon, Zara would say. Wear the blue jacket, Diana would answer. That was their language. Practical, forward-moving. No room for the weight of what was actually happening. What was actually happening was this. Diana Cole needed surgery. Her cardiologist had explained it twice now, once with charts and once without, as if simpler words might make the number smaller. They didn't. $18,000, 6 weeks. After that, the risk became something he wouldn't put a percentage on, which told Zara everything she needed to know. $18,000. Zara had counted what was in the coffee tin above the refrigerator the night before. She did the math in her head on the way downstairs each morning. The number never got close enough to matter. So she sang. She had been singing since she could talk, in the kitchen, in the stairwell, in the back of the church 3 blocks over where the acoustics made even ordinary voices sound like something worth hearing. Nobody had taught her technique. Nobody had taught her breath control or posture, or how to place a note so it carries to the back of a room. She had learned by listening, to her mother's old recordings, to gospel choirs, to the way certain songs moved through a space differently depending on where you stood when you sang them. She sat up every morning at the corner of Junction and 5th, cap on the ground, eyes closed, and she sang. Most people walked past. That was fine. Some stopped for 30 seconds, dropped something, moved on. That was fine too. A few stayed longer. A construction worker who leaned against a lamppost with his coffee. An old woman who mouthed the words to things Zara didn't know she knew. Those were the moments Zara sang for. Not the money, the stillness. Across the city in a glass office on the 40th floor, Richard Hargrove was already at his desk. His assistant had placed a fresh report in front of him. Proposals for the Young American Voices competition, the annual talent showcase his foundation sponsored. $300,000 in prize money and scholarships, distributed each year to what the Foundation's website called the next generation of American musical excellence. Hargrove flipped through the headshots without reading the bios. A violinist from Boston, a pianist from Atlanta, a cellist, young, black, impressive credentials. He turned the page. "We need someone who fits the brand," he said without looking up. His assistant nodded and made a note. That afternoon, Zara counted $31 in her cap and walked home to make her mother soup. The surgery fund stood at $2,240. She had 5 weeks and 3 days left. It was a Thursday morning when everything changed, though it didn't look like that at first. Zara arrived at Junction and 5th a little after 7, earlier than usual. The street was still half asleep. A delivery truck idling at the corner, a woman walking a dog that kept stopping to smell everything, the bodega owner 2 doors down pulling up his metal gate with a sound like a slow exhale. She set her cap down, smoothed her jacket, closed her eyes, and she sang Nessun Dorma. Not the Italian. She had translated it herself over weeks, rewriting the lyrics in the margins of a school notebook, keeping the melody exactly as Puccini wrote it, but filling it with words that belonged to her. Words about a woman coughing behind a thin wall, about a coffee tin that was never full enough, about the particular kind of love that shows up every morning and doesn't explain itself. Nobody asked for it. Nobody announced it. But within 4 minutes, something happened that happens sometimes. The rare mornings when everything lined up right. The air, the acoustics of the buildings around her, something invisible and unscheduled. People stopped. Not politely. Not the way people slow down to glance at something mildly interesting. They stopped the way you stop when you've walked into a room and forgotten completely why you came. 30 people. Then 40. Marcus Webb was cutting through the block on his way to a press junket he was already late for. He had his earbuds in. He pulled one out to check the commotion, then the other. He stood there for a full minute before he even thought to reach for his phone. He filmed 43 seconds, posted it without a caption. Just her voice, the street, the crowd standing still in the middle of a Thursday morning like time had briefly stopped taking requests. Then he put his phone in his pocket and stayed for the rest. 3 blocks away, a black SUV rolled to a stop at a red light. Inside, Richard Hargrove was on a call. He wasn't listening to it anymore. His eyes moved toward the window. His hand, just slightly, lowered his phone from his ear. The light turned green. The car didn't move for 4 full seconds. Then it did. But his assistant, watching from the passenger seat, noted something she had never seen before in 6 years of working for him. Richard Hargrove had stopped talking mid-sentence, and he hadn't noticed. Marcus Webb posted the clip at 7:42 in the morning. By 9:15, it had 34,000 views. By noon, the number was past 180,000 and climbing in the specific way that things climb when they've caught something real. Not the slow, manufactured rise of a promoted post, but the sudden vertical spike of something people are sending to each other with no message attached, because no message is needed. The comments were immediate and overwhelming. "Who is this child? Someone find her!" I pulled over to cry. My grandmother used to sing like that. "This can't be real. Where is she?" Marcus found Zara through her neighbor, a retired music teacher named Patricia James, who had been watching Zara sing on that corner for 3 months and had been waiting, with the quiet patience of someone who has seen talent before and knows better than to rush it, for exactly this moment. He sat across from Zara at Patricia's kitchen table that evening. He turned his phone around and showed her the screen. Zara stared at the number for a long time without speaking. "That's you," Marcus said. "That's what you sound like to the rest of the world." She looked up. "People just stopped because it was weird. Somebody singing on the street." "No," he said. "People stopped because they couldn't leave." Patricia set 3 cups of tea on the table and sat down. She slid a printed flyer across to Zara. "Young American Voices. Annual competition. Riverside Cultural Center. Prize money. $20,000. Full music scholarship included. Sponsored by the Hargrove Foundation." Zara read it twice. "I don't have a school. I don't have a teacher on record. I've never performed anywhere. The eligibility rules say ages 12 to 18, Patricia said. That's all they say. That's all they need to say, Marcus added. Zara was quiet for a long time. She reached into the front pocket of her jacket and pulled out the photograph. Her mother, center stage, arms open, lit from above like something sacred. She set it on the table between them, looked at it, then looked up. Okay, she said. Just that, one word. But the way she said it left no space for doubt. The Riverside Cultural Center sat on the corner of Amsterdam and 84th, a building that had been many things over the decades. A theater, a courthouse annex, a shuttered event hall, before the Hargrove Foundation renovated it 8 years ago and turned it into what the Foundation's brochure called a beacon of artistic excellence for the next generation. The marble floors were new. The chandeliers were restored. The main hall seated 212 people and had acoustics that a reviewer once described as among the finest of any mid-sized venue in the city. It was, in every visible way, not a place built for a girl who had spent the last 4 months singing on concrete. Zara arrived with Patricia on a Saturday morning, 2 hours before the competition began. She wore the only dress she owned, pale blue, slightly too long, hemmed the night before by Patricia with a needle and thread under a kitchen lamp. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands, Patricia noticed, were completely still. The registration desk was staffed by 2 young women in Hargrove Foundation lanyards who looked at Zara's form, then at Zara, then at the form again. No school affiliation? One of them said. No, Zara said. No private instructor on record? No. A pause, the kind that carries weight it's trying to hide. Okay, the woman said finally and stamped the form. You're number 11. The backstage area was a long corridor with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs lined against the wall. The other competitors moved through it with the particular confidence of children who have been prepared, warmed up by coaches, fussed over by parents, running through fingerings and breathing exercises with the focused efficiency of people who have done this many times before. Zara sat in a folding chair near the end of the corridor and watched. A boy with a violin case walked past and glanced at her dress, said nothing, kept walking. A girl with a vocal coach whispering in her ear paused near Zara, looked her up and down once and moved on. Patricia sat beside her. She didn't offer encouragement. She didn't run through last-minute instructions. She simply sat there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, in the way that people who genuinely love each other don't need to fill silence. In the main hall, at the center of the judges' table, Richard Hargrove sat with his nameplate in front of him and a glass of water he hadn't touched. He was reviewing something on his phone when his assistant leaned over and pointed at the program. He followed her finger to number 11. Zara Cole. No school. No instructor. Bronx, New York. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his assistant. Find out who let this through, he said quietly. She nodded and stepped away. The competition ran in order. A pianist from a conservatory prep school in Manhattan opened with a technically flawless Chopin etude that drew warm, appreciative applause. A violinist from Brooklyn performed a movement from Mendelssohn with the kind of controlled precision that makes judges lean forward and write things down. A soprano from a private arts academy in New Jersey sang a Mozart aria with perfect diction and absolutely nothing behind it. Hargrove nodded at each of them, made notes, checked his watch. When the MC called number 11, the corridor door opened and Zara walked out. She walked the way she always walked, not with performance, not with the practiced entrance of someone who had been coached on how to cross a stage. She simply walked to the center, stopped, and stood there. The MC leaned into his microphone. And what will you be performing today? Ave Maria, Zara said. A cappella. A murmur moved through the hall. One of the judges shifted in his seat. Hargrove looked up from his notes for the first time since the competition began. Whenever you're ready, the MC said. Zara closed her eyes, and then she opened her mouth. The first note was so quiet that half the room almost missed it. A single thread of sound, thin and clear, rising from somewhere that didn't seem like it could come from a girl that size. It floated out into the hall and hung there for a moment, testing the air. Then the second note came. Higher, fuller. Like the first note had been a question and this one was the answer. What happened next is the thing that people who were in that hall would describe differently depending on who you asked, but would always describe, because it was the kind of moment that writes itself into memory without asking permission. The noise of the room, the small shufflings, the quiet coughs, the rustling of programs stopped. Not gradually, all at once, as if someone had reached into the air and turned a dial. 200 people went silent in the span of 8 seconds. A father in the third row had been filming on his phone. He lowered it without realizing he had. A woman in the 7th row who had come only because her nephew was performing pressed her hand flat against her sternum without knowing why. A journalist from a local arts publication who had covered 40 of these competitions and had stopped expecting to be surprised sat very still with her pen hovering above her notepad, not writing anything, just listening. At the judges' table, 3 of the 4 judges had stopped making notes. The 4th was Richard Hargrove. He was still writing. Zara sang through the first verse with her eyes closed, her body almost completely still, only her hands moving slightly at her sides. Not performing, not gesturing, just existing in the way that people exist when they are doing the thing they were made for. The melody moved through the hall like water finding the shape of a room, filling every corner, reaching the back rows with the same clarity it had at the front. When she reached the high note, the sustained B-flat that sits at the peak of the piece like a held breath, 3 people in the front row audibly exhaled. A woman near the middle of the hall, older, gray-haired, sitting alone in an aisle seat, pressed both hands over her mouth. She was crying. Quietly, completely, the way people cry when something reaches them in a place they had forgotten existed. Nobody noticed her. They were all looking at the stage. Zara held the note for 4 full counts. Then she let it go and brought the piece home. Softly, gently, like setting something fragile down on a surface you trust. The last note dissolved into the air. Silence. 3 seconds of it. Real silence. The kind that only exists when 200 people are all holding the same breath. Then the room came apart. The applause started somewhere in the middle and moved outward in both directions simultaneously, the way a stone hits water. People stood, not one at a time, not in a slow wave, but in clusters, spontaneously, because their bodies made the decision before their minds caught up. Patricia, standing at the back of the hall, pressed one hand over her eyes. At the judges' table, 3 of the 4 judges were on their feet. Richard Hargrove sat perfectly still in his chair. He was looking at Zara. His pen was no longer moving. And for just a moment, one unguarded, unscripted moment that his assistant would later say she had never seen before and never saw again, his face held something that might have been recognition. Not of the girl, of the voice. The applause was still echoing off the marble walls when Hargrove leaned toward his assistant. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Find out everything about her," he said. "School, family, address, everything." His assistant was already typing. The results were posted 2 hours later on a board outside the main hall, printed on Hargrove Foundation letterhead, names listed in order of advancement to the final round. Parents crowded around it. Coaches leaned over shoulders. Phones came out. Patricia found it first. She read the list 3 times, slowly, the way you reread something when you're sure you must be misreading it. Zara's name was not there. She found the competition director, a thin man in a Hargrove Foundation lanyard named Gerald, near the registration desk. She kept her voice even, the way women who have spent decades in underfunded schools learn to keep their voices even when they are anything but. "Zara Cole performed this morning," Patricia said. "She's not on the list." Gerald looked at his clipboard. "She was disqualified." "On what grounds?" "Competitors are required to have documented formal training from an accredited institution or a certified private instructor." He said it the way people recite things they have recently been told to recite. smoothly, without looking up. "It's in the competition guidelines." "I have a copy of those guidelines," Patricia said. "That requirement is not in them." Gerald looked up for the first time. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the cousin of it. "The guidelines were updated this morning," he said. "We notified all participants by email." "She doesn't have email." A pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "There's nothing I can do." Patricia stood there for a moment looking at him, not with anger, because anger would have given him somewhere to go, but with the specific, terrible clarity of a woman who has seen this particular door closed before and knows exactly whose hand is on the other side of it. She turned and walked back to where Zara was waiting in the corridor. She didn't have to say anything. Zara read it on her face. For a long moment, the girl said nothing. She looked down at her shoes, at the marble floor that probably cost more per square foot than their monthly rent, at the Hargrove Foundation logo etched into the wall beside the door. Then she picked up her jacket, and she walked outside. Patricia followed her, already reaching for her arm, already forming the words that would come next. The comfort, the plan, the "we'll figure this out." But she stopped. Because Zara had sat down on the front steps of the Riverside Cultural Center, the same way she sat every morning on the corner of Junction and Fifth, and she had set her cap down on the step below her. And she opened her mouth and sang. No announcement, no explanation, no microphone, no stage, no permission, just her voice, hitting the open air of Amsterdam Avenue on a Saturday afternoon. The first person to stop was a woman pushing a stroller. She slowed, then halted, turning toward the sound with the instinctive, involuntary attention that certain sounds command before the brain catches up. Then a man walking past with headphones. He pulled one side off, then another, then three more. Within 10 minutes, the steps of the Riverside Cultural Center held more than 80 people, spilling down onto the sidewalk, blocking the entrance, standing in the street with their phones raised, not to post, not yet, just to hold on to the moment in the only way they knew how. Marcus, who had been waiting across the street, hit live on his phone without hesitating. Within 7 minutes, 40,000 people were watching. Inside the building, Gerald, the competition director, stood at the glass door and looked out at the crowd and said nothing. At the back of the building, Hargrove was being walked to his car through a side exit. He heard it. He stopped walking. His hand came up slightly, just barely, and his driver, who had worked for him for 11 years, stopped too without being told. They stood there in the narrow service alley for a full minute and 40 seconds. Then Hargrove lowered his hand. "Keep going," he said. But his voice, for the first time all day, had lost its edge. The live stream ended when Zara's voice did. She sang for 22 minutes on those steps. No set list, no plan, just song after song drawn from whatever the moment asked for. And when she finally stopped, when the last note released itself into the afternoon air and the silence after it settled over the crowd like something physical, there was a pause of about 4 seconds before the applause came. 4 seconds is a long time when 200 people are holding their breath together. The applause, when it arrived, was not polite. It was not the measured, appropriate response of an audience that has been told when to clap. It was the sound of people who had been ambushed by something they weren't prepared for and had no way to respond to except with everything they had. Marcus stopped the stream and looked at his phone. 214,000 views in 22 minutes. The comments were still coming in faster than they could be read. A vertical scroll of people trying to put into words something that didn't have words. "I was there. I'm standing on the street right now crying. Someone needs to sign this child. Who is she? Find her. What just happened?" A woman made her way through the crowd to where Zara was still sitting on the steps. She was older, late 60s, gray natural hair, a quiet elegance in the way she carried herself that had nothing to do with money. She sat down beside Zara without asking permission, the way people sit beside each other in church. "Your mother sang," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Zara looked at her. "How did you know?" The woman smiled, the kind of smile that carries something heavy behind it. Because I know that voice, she said. I have known that voice for a very long time. She pressed a card into Zara's hand, stood, and walked away into the crowd before Zara could ask anything else. Zara looked down at the card. Ruth Simmons, former Associate Director, New York City Philharmonic. She turned it over. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, "We need to talk. There are things you don't know." By Sunday morning, the clip had 1.2 million views. By Sunday afternoon, Hargrove's legal team had filed a DMCA takedown notice against Marcus's live stream. The grounds. A piece of music played briefly over the Cultural Center's internal speaker system during the competition, a commissioned work owned by the Hargrove Foundation, had been audible for approximately 11 seconds in the background of the recording. 11 seconds. Marcus got the notification while he was eating breakfast. He stared at it for a long time. Then he put down his fork and opened his laptop. By Monday morning, the original stream was gone. By Monday afternoon, 61 mirror uploads had appeared across every platform that existed, posted by people Marcus had never met and would never meet, in cities he had never been to, for no reason other than that they had seen something true and didn't want it to disappear. The combined view count across all mirrors had passed 1.8 million. The takedown had not silenced anything. It had handed the story a megaphone. But Hargrove was not finished. A website with no visible ownership published a story that Monday, picked up within hours by two entertainment blogs that Marcus recognized as having run favorable Hargrove Foundation coverage in the past, suggesting that the entire thing had been staged. That Patricia James, a retired teacher with a social media following of 400 people, had manufactured the street performance and the competition incident as a deliberate publicity stunt. That Zara was not a struggling child at all, but a coached plant, and that the emotions people had seen on that live stream were a performance of a different kind. The article was written carefully enough to avoid being technically false. It implied rather than stated. It questioned rather than accused. It was, in the specific way that certain kinds of cruelty are, almost worse for being sophisticated. The comments beneath it were not sophisticated at all. Marcus read them and closed the tab. Then he called Ruth Simmons. She answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting. They met that evening at a diner on 116th Street, a corner booth, Ruth already there when Marcus arrived, a cup of tea in front of her that she hadn't touched. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they have been carrying something for a very long time and have made their peace with the weight of it. She told him everything. 15 years ago, Diana Cole had been at the height of a career that people in the industry spoke about in the specific hushed tones reserved for once-in-a-generation talent. Hargrove had approached her personally, not through an intermediary, not through her manager, but personally, with a contract that would have made her the flagship artist of his entire media operation. The contract gave Hargrove's company final approval over every performance, every recording, every public appearance. A 10-year term. A silence clause that extended 5 years beyond it. Diana had read it twice, asked one question: "What happens if I want to perform something you don't approve?" And when she received the answer, she put the contract down on the table and slid it back across without signing it. Within 6 months, every major venue in the city had stopped returning her manager's calls. Every festival, every orchestra engagement, every recording opportunity, all of it, gone. Not loudly, not with any announcement or explanation, just gone. Door after door closing quietly, the way powerful men close doors when they want to make sure no one hears the sound. Ruth had watched it happen. She had tried to intervene twice and been told both times, in language that was perfectly polite and absolutely clear, that her involvement would not be welcome. She had stayed silent for 15 years because she had a career too, and because silence had felt, at the time, like the only door left open. "I have been waiting," she said, wrapping both hands around her cold cup of tea, "for someone to give me a reason to stop being silent." Marcus reached into his bag and placed a recorder on the table between them. She looked at it, nodded once, And then, in a corner booth of a diner on 116th Street, Ruth Simmons began to speak. The story broke on a Tuesday. Marcus published everything. Ruth's full recorded testimony, the original contract Hargrove had presented to Diana 15 years ago, the timeline of every door that had closed in the 6 months after she refused to sign it, and the internal Hargrove Foundation email, obtained through a source Marcus would never name, instructing Gerald to add the formal training requirement to the competition guidelines at 7:14 on the morning of the competition. 7:14. 42 minutes after Zara had already registered. The piece ran on Marcus's publication at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., it had been picked up by 4 major outlets. By noon, it was everywhere. The comment sections were something Marcus had never seen in 15 years of journalism. Not the usual split of opinion, not the familiar back and forth of people talking past each other, but something closer to unanimity. Hundreds of thousands of people from places that agreed on almost nothing, agreeing on this. This is wrong. This has always been wrong. Her name is Zara Cole, and she deserved better, and so did her mother. Hashtag Justice for Zara appeared at 9 a.m. and was trending nationally by 10. Hashtag Let Her Sing followed an hour later. The mirror uploads of Zara's performance, all 61 of them, spread across every platform, began accumulating views at a rate that the original stream never had, because now people weren't just watching a girl sing. They were watching a girl sing, knowing everything that had been done to stop her from being heard. The two things together were unbearable in the specific way that truth and injustice are unbearable when they occupy the same frame. Combined views passed 3 million by Wednesday morning. Ruth Simmons gave a second interview, this time on camera, sitting straight-backed and clear-eyed in her living room, saying the same things she had said in the diner, but now saying them to a lens that would carry them everywhere. She named names. She gave dates. She described, in the precise and careful language of a woman who has been waiting 15 years to use it, exactly what Richard Hargrove had done, and exactly how he had done it. She ended the interview with 11 words that would be clipped and shared more than anything else she said. Diana Cole was the finest soprano I ever heard. Full stop. 4 other artists came forward in the 72 hours that followed, 2 of them well known enough that their names alone drew headlines, describing variations of the same pattern. Contracts with impossible terms, refusals followed by silence, careers that had simply quietly stopped. None of them had spoken before. All of them said the same thing when asked why they were speaking now. Because of Zara. Patricia James, who had no social media presence and no public profile, and had simply been a woman who loved music and recognized something extraordinary when she heard it, gave one brief statement to a reporter who knocked on her door. "I told that child she wasn't begging," she said. "I told her she was giving. I just didn't know yet how much she had to give." It was the most quoted line of the week. At the Hargrove Foundation offices on the 40th floor, the phones had been ringing since Monday, and the foundation's PR firm had drafted and discarded 11 different statements without releasing any of them. The board of directors requested an emergency meeting. 3 corporate sponsors quietly paused their partnerships pending review. A senator whose district included the Bronx sent a letter asking pointed questions about the foundation's grant practices. Hargrove took none of the calls, but on Wednesday evening, his assistant found him standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, looking out at the city the way people look at things they are trying to understand from a distance. She placed the latest press summary on his desk. He didn't turn around. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "Diana Cole, the girl's mother." She paused. "She's agreed to come to the open showcase on Friday. She hasn't been inside a performance venue in 15 years. The city stretched out below him, indifferent and enormous. He was quiet for a very long time. "Make sure the front row is accessible," he said finally. His assistant looked at his back for a moment. Then she wrote it down. Friday came the way important days always do. looking exactly like any other day until you're standing in the middle of it. The Riverside Cultural Center had been transformed overnight. Not in its appearance. The marble floors were the same, the chandeliers were the same, the Hargrove Foundation logo was still etched into the wall beside the entrance. But in its atmosphere, the way a room changes when the people inside it know that something real is about to happen and have no script for it. Press credentials filled the first 3 rows on the left side. A classical music streaming channel had set up 2 cameras at opposite ends of the hall. Marcus was there with his recorder and a photographer he trusted. Ruth Simmons sat in the front row center, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, dressed as if she were attending Carnegie Hall. The hall filled quickly. 240 people, standing room at the back. Hargrove arrived through the main entrance, not the side exit he had used on Saturday, and walked to the VIP table at the front without speaking to anyone. His face was composed. His suit was impeccable. He looked, Patricia thought from across the room, like a man who had decided exactly how this afternoon was going to go and was holding that decision in place through sheer force of will. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The MC welcomed the audience, said several careful things about the Foundation's commitment to artistic excellence and community access, and then introduced the afternoon's performer. The door at the side of the stage opened. Zara walked out. She was wearing the same pale blue dress, still slightly too long, still hemmed with Patricia's kitchen table stitching, and she walked to the center of the stage the same way she always walked anywhere, without performance, without calculation, just a 14-year-old girl putting one foot in front of the other until she arrived at the place she was going. She looked out at the hall. 240 people looked back at her. Then she looked down at the front row. And she stopped. Patricia had told her that morning that there would be a surprise. She had not said what it was. Zara had nodded and asked no questions, the way she had learned not to ask questions about things she couldn't control. But she had not been prepared for this. Diana Cole sat in the front row in a wheelchair, a gray blanket across her lap, her hair pinned back, her hands folded the same way Ruth's were folded beside her. She was thinner than she had been in the photograph. Her breathing was careful, measured, the breathing of someone who had learned to spend it wisely. But her eyes were the same as the photograph, lit from somewhere inside. She looked at her daughter on that stage and she did not look away. Zara stood completely still for 5 seconds. The hall was silent. Nobody coughed, nobody shifted, nobody looked at their phone. 240 people understood without being told that they were inside a moment that did not belong to them, and they held themselves accordingly. Then Zara reached into the pocket of her pale blue dress and drew out the photograph. Her mother, center stage, arms open, lit from above, and placed it on the small stand at the front of the stage. She looked at it for just a moment. Then she looked at her mother, and she sang. She sang Ave Maria, the same melody Diana had taught her on the kitchen floor of a one-room apartment in the Bronx when Zara was 5 years old, and the world was smaller and simpler, and her mother's voice had been the largest thing in it. She sang it the way it had lived inside her for 9 years, through the coughing and the coffee tin and the concrete and the closed doors. Not as a performance, not as a demonstration of anything, but as the only language she had ever found that was large enough to hold everything she needed to say. Diana Cole began to cry at the first note. She did not cover her face. She did not look away. She sat in the front row of the Riverside Cultural Center, the same building where her last performance had been erased from every record 15 years ago, and she let her daughter's voice find her completely, the way it always had across thin walls and dark mornings, and she wept without apology or restraint. The hall did not move. 17 minutes. Not one person left. Not one phone screen lit up. The cameras recorded and the journalists sat with their pens down, and Ruth Simmons closed her eyes and listened with the full attention of someone receiving something they had waited a very long time for. When the last note ended, the silence lasted longer than it had the first time. 6 full seconds. Then Ruth Simmons stood up. Then the hall stood up. All of it. All at once. The way things happen when 240 people make the same decision in the same instant without consulting each other. Richard Hargrove sat in his chair. He was looking at the stage, at the girl, at the woman in the wheelchair in the front row, whose face he had not allowed himself to look at directly since she walked through the door. He sat there while the applause built around him like weather. And then, slowly, without drama, without anyone asking him to, he stood. He did not clap. He just stood. And for the first time in the 3 days since the story had broken, since the calls he hadn't taken and the statements that hadn't been released, and the window he had stood at looking out at a city that had made up its mind without him, for the first time, Richard Hargrove looked like a man who understood, fully and without the protection of distance, exactly what he had done. Not to a career, to a person, to two of them. The press conference was Hargrove's idea, not his PR firm's, not his board's, not his lawyers, who had spent 3 days constructing careful language about institutional processes and procedural reviews and the Foundation's ongoing commitment to equitable access. Language designed to acknowledge without admitting, to apologize without accepting, to close a door quietly the way doors had always been closed. Hargrove read the draft, set it down, and called the press conference himself. It was held the following Monday morning in a small room on the ground floor of the Hargrove Media Building. Not the 40th floor, not the boardroom with the view, but a plain room with folding chairs and a podium and no backdrop with the company logo. His communications director had suggested the logo. Hargrove had said no. He walked in alone. No assistant beside him, no lawyer at his elbow. He stood at the podium and looked at the room. 14 journalists, 2 cameras, Marcus Webb in the 3rd row with his recorder already running, and he did not unfold any paper. He spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He said that 15 years ago he had made a decision about Diana Cole that he had justified to himself at the time with the particular ease that powerful men bring to the justification of things they want to do. He said that he had used his position to close doors that had no business being closed, that he had done it quietly and deliberately, and that the quiet and the deliberateness were not mitigating factors but the opposite. He said that he had watched Diana Cole's daughter stand on a stage last Friday and sing with a voice that made the room stop breathing, and he had understood, in a way he could not unknow, what 15 years of closed doors had cost. He did not say he was a changed man. He did not say he had learned and grown. He did not use the word journey. He said, "I caused serious harm to Diana Cole. I caused harm to her daughter. I am sorry. Those words are not enough, and I know they are not enough, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." Then he said what he was going to do. The Hargrove Foundation would cover Diana Cole's surgery in full. All costs, all follow-up care, no conditions, and no paperwork beyond what the hospital required. A fund of $250,000 would be established in Diana's name for artists who had been displaced from the industry through practices similar to those she had experienced. An independent panel, no Hargrove Foundation employees, no Hargrove affiliates, would review the Foundation's contracting history for the past 20 years. He paused. Zara Cole will be offered the Young American Voices Scholarship unconditionally, not as a gesture, because she won it. He stepped back from the podium. Nobody applauded. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when people are deciding what they think. A journalist raised her hand and asked 2 questions. Hargrove answered both directly. Marcus did not ask a question, he just watched. Afterward, in a hospital room 3 miles away, a nurse turned on the television, and Diana Cole watched the last 90 seconds of the press conference from her bed, 2 days before her surgery, with Patricia sitting in the chair beside her. When it was over, Diana was quiet for a long time. "He looked smaller," she said finally. "In person, he always looked so much larger than everything else." Patricia reached over and took her hand. "That's what happens," Patricia said, "when the thing propping him up is gone." Diana looked at the ceiling. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, continuing. A siren somewhere, a horn. The specific white noise of 10 million people living their lives in the same general direction. "Is she outside?" Diana asked. "She's been outside since 7, Patricia said. Diana smiled. The real one, the one from the photograph, the one that looked lit from inside. "Send her in," she said. The door opened and Zara came in, still in her jacket, her face doing the thing it always did when she was trying not to show how relieved she was and failing completely. She sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's other hand and didn't say anything for a while. Outside, the city continued. Inside, for the first time in a long time, it was quiet in a way that felt like rest rather than holding back. 3 weeks later, Zara was back on the corner of Junction and 5th. Not because she had to be. The scholarship covered everything: school, housing assistance, a stipend that meant Diana's coffee tin could finally hold something other than emergency money. The surgery had gone well. Diana was home, breathing easier than she had in 2 years, sitting up in bed with the window open for the first time since Zara could remember. Zara was there because she wanted to be. She sat on the same step, set her cap down the same way, upside down on the concrete in front of her. Then she looked at it for a moment, picked it up, and put it in her bag. She didn't need it anymore. She sang anyway. It was Ave Maria, the same as always, but something in it had shifted. Not the notes, not the melody, but the weight behind it. The thing she had always been singing toward, without knowing exactly what it was, had been found. And now the song was not a question anymore. It was something closer to an answer. People stopped. They always stopped. A construction worker with a coffee, an old woman who mouthed the words, a little girl in a yellow coat who tugged her father's sleeve and pointed and would not be moved until the song was finished. Nobody knew, looking at her, everything that had happened. They just knew what they always knew on this corner, that something real was occurring, and that real things deserved to be stood still for. The voiceover settles one last time, quiet and certain. She wasn't discovered, she was recognized. There's a difference. Discovery implies she was hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. She wasn't hidden. She was right here, on this step, on this corner, in that hall, offering the truest thing she had every single day to anyone willing to stop long enough to receive it. The world didn't give her a voice. It just finally got quiet enough to hear it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've ever been told that where you come from determines how far you can go, this one was for you. There's one detail in the very first minute of this story that tells you exactly how it ends. Most people catch it on the second watch. Go back and look. If you want more stories like this one, stories about people who carried something extraordinary through impossible circumstances and refused to put it down, subscribe. There are more. There are so many more.
Hargrove paid for Diana's surgery, gave Sarah the scholarship, stood at a podium alone, no lawyer, no script, admitting he destroyed a woman's career because she said no. But here's what this story really taught me. First, Diana was the finest soprano Thor Simons ever heard. Hargrove destroyed her not because she lacked talent, but because she refused to give him control over it. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who hate your gift. They're the ones who want to own it and punish you when you won't let them. Second, they silenced Diana, but not what she passed down. Zara learned Ave Maria on the kitchen floor from a mother with nothing left except her voice and her daughter. No teacher, no studio, no money, just love passed hand to hand like a flame. That's real legacy. Not what to build for yourself, but what survives inside the people who come after you. Third, Zara got disqualified, video taken down, name dropped. She walked outside, sat on the steps, and sang anyway. No stage, no microphone, no permission. They can take your platform, your opportunity, your shot, but they cannot take what lies inside you. The only person who can silence your gift is you. So who's the Zara near you right now? Someone with real talent, singing on a corner, invincible to everyone walking past? Have you stopped to listen? Or are you still walking?